My wife, Willow, never even dreamed that, just because of one sentence she said before she died. After being reborn, I would publicly announce the cancellation of our engagement on the spot. Everyone thought I had gone crazy, that I would actually tear things apart with the Liu family, a medical giant, and give up such a grand business blueprint just like that. But what no one knew was that Willow Liu was actually one of the nation's top scientists. Her research project could have cured a deadly disease that killed millions. Yet after marrying me, she became a wealthy housewife who indulged herself every day, shopping nonstop. Meanwhile, after the marriage alliance, I worked myself to exhaustion. But my career still couldn't surpass my competitors. Who could tolerate that? So after being reborn, I directly turned Willow from my wife into a workhorse. As long as I could obtain her research patents, wouldn't I be able to lie back and enjoy life for the rest of my days? In this life, it's finally my turn to live in comfort. Chapter 1. Before my wife died, she said something to me. It wasn't, "I love you." It wasn't, "Take care of the child." It wasn't even any kind of tender last words or instructions for after she was gone. What she said was, "If there's a next life, I hope I can continue being my scientist self and not be married off for an alliance." After saying that, her hand slipped out of my palm. I didn't even have time to ask her what she meant. The siren of the ambulance pierced through the entire tunnel. I held her already cold body, my mind completely blank. Her blood seeped through my fingers, staining the watch she never took off, the gift our two families gave us when we entered that marriage alliance. She had worn that watch for 3 years. The dial was covered in tiny scratches I had never noticed before. My name is George Wang, the only son of the Wang family. At 27, I took over half of the family business. That marriage alliance 3 years ago was decided by our parents over drinks. My father said, "The Wang family needs the Liu family's resources in the medical sector." The Liu family said, "The Liu family needs the Wang family's financial support." As for me and her, Willow Liu, the second daughter of the Liu family, a PhD in biochemistry from MIT, our opinions didn't matter. I remember the day of the marriage alliance. She wore a white wedding dress, standing in the hotel lobby, her makeup flawless, her smile appropriate and composed. When I walked over and took her hand, her fingertips felt cold. I asked, "Nervous?" She said, "No, I'm just not used to high heels." That was the first thing she said to me that wasn't mere politeness. Only after we got married did I find out that, in the past, she wore Crocs and a lab coat in the lab. Her hair always tied into a messy ponytail. Her face never touched by makeup. But after marrying into the Wang family, she woke up at 6 every morning, spent an hour putting on makeup, styling her hair, and choosing her outfit, then sat at the dining table waiting to have breakfast with me. I left the house at 8. Breakfast usually lasted only 10 minutes. The makeup she spent an hour preparing, I saw it for 10 minutes a day. Sometimes when I worked late into the night and came home, she would still be waiting for me in the living room. On the coffee table was a cup of honey water at the perfect temperature. She would be leaning against the sofa, already asleep, still holding a fashion magazine in her hand. At the time, I thought this was just the daily life of a wealthy housewife. She seemed to have adapted well. I never once asked her whether she liked that kind of life. The car accident happened on a Saturday. I rarely had free time, so I said I'd take her to a resort in the suburbs for a couple of days. She sat in the passenger seat and, for once, spoke a little more. She said she had recently been reading a popular science book about gene editing. She said that CRISPR technology had already advanced to the 4th generation. She said her former advisor had published a paper in Cell last month, solving a key bottleneck in off-target effects. She said a lot, her voice soft, as if she was afraid that if she talked too much, I'd get annoyed. I responded with a few absent-minded MMs while driving. Then my phone rang. It was work. I picked it up and talked for more than 10 minutes. After I hung up, she stopped talking. The car was quiet for a long time. I glanced at her and saw that she was looking out the window, her fingers tracing something on the glass. Later, I thought she was probably drawing molecular structures. When the truck lost control in the tunnel, I didn't react at all. I only heard a loud crash, and then the whole world started spinning. When the airbags deployed, 2 of my ribs broke. The pain nearly made me pass out, but I heard her voice. She was calling me, "George. George." I turned my head to look at her. Her side was more severely crushed. The car door caved in, trapping her legs. There was a long gash on her forehead, blood covering half her face. She was looking at me, her eyes bright. She wasn't crying. "Are you okay?" she asked. I couldn't speak because of the pain. She smiled faintly, her lips moving, and said something that still makes my whole body tremble when I think about it. "George, my lab coat, it's still in the locker at the lab. I didn't take it with me when I left." She was talking about 3 years ago. 3 years ago, when she left the lab before marrying me. That was when I realized she had never let it go. It took the rescue team 40 minutes to get her out of the car. For those 40 minutes, she kept talking, as if trying to say everything she hadn't said in the past 3 years. She said the acknowledgement section of her doctoral thesis was 3 pages long, and her advisor said she was too verbose. She said her last experiment took 2 years before it produced data, and that day she cried in the lab for an hour. She said she actually wasn't very good at makeup, she learned from videos, and even now her eyeliner still came out uneven. She said she woke up at 5:30 every morning because of habits she developed in the lab. She used to get up at that time to run gels. She also said, she didn't actually dislike me. She said, "You're a good person, George. It's just that neither of us chose this." That final line, "if there's a next life," was said in the ambulance. After that, she stopped breathing. Chapter 2. I lay in another ambulance, a broken rib piercing into my lung, making it hard to breathe. But there was only one thought in my mind. She said that if there was a next life, she didn't want to be married off for an alliance. She wanted to continue being her scientist self. She didn't mention me. She didn't say she hoped to meet me again in the next life. In her life plans, there had never been a place for me. When I closed my eyes, I heard the heart monitor draw out a long, flat line. Not hers, mine. I thought that when people died, everything simply ended. But when I opened my eyes again, what I saw was a crystal chandelier. It looked very familiar. It was the chandelier in the banquet hall of the Wang family's old mansion, imported from Italy, supposedly costing $3 million. When I was a child, I thought it was beautiful. When I grew up, I thought it was tacky. I looked down at myself, a tailored black suit, a red boutonniere pinned to my chest. Someone beside me pushed me. "George, what are you spacing out for? It's time to go on stage. The Liu family is already here." It was my father. His hair hadn't turned white yet. His back was straight. His spirit strong. This was him from 3 years ago. 3 years later, he would be hospitalized twice for a stroke and need help just to walk. I glanced down at my phone. The date on the screen read clearly, May 18, 2021, the day of the marriage alliance. I had returned to 3 years ago, returned to the day I was about to marry Willow. I stood behind the side door of the banquet hall, peering through the gap at the scene inside. The Liu family sat in the front row on the left, the Wang family on the right. A red carpet stretched down the middle aisle, leading to a main stage decorated with flowers and balloons. The host was warming up the crowd on stage, saying cliché lines about a perfect match and equal social standing. And Willow stood at the other end of the red carpet. She wore a white wedding dress, exactly as I remembered. Her hair was pinned up, revealing her slender neck. Her makeup was light, but it was clear she had put great effort into it. I would never have noticed such things before. I couldn't even remember what color clothes she wore each day. But now, standing behind that side door, I looked at that 23-year-old Willow, holding a bouquet, standing quietly, waiting for a man she had never truly known to come and take her hand. Her fingertips were cold. I remembered. I still remembered the temperature of her hand slipping out of my palm. "George, what are you dawdling for?" my father urged again, his tone already impatient. I took a deep breath, slipped my phone into my pocket, and straightened my tie. Then I pushed open the side door. Instead of walking toward the red carpet, I went straight to the main stage and took the microphone from the host. The entire hall fell silent. Everyone looked at me, including Willow. She lifted her head, a trace of confusion in her eyes, but more than that, polite expectation. She was waiting for her marriage alliance partner to say a few formal lines, then go through the motions and complete the process, becoming a wealthy family's wife. I held the microphone and looked at her. Then I said, "The wedding banquet is cancelled." The hall erupted in shock. My father shot to his feet, his face livid. My mother covered her mouth, disbelief written all over her face. The Liu family exchanged glances. Willow Liu's father, the current head of the Liu family, Hudson Liu, his expression darkened. Willow didn't move. She stood there, holding that bouquet of white flowers, looking at me. "George, do you even know what you're saying?" My father's voice squeezed out through clenched teeth. I knew it too well. 3 years ago, I didn't know what I was doing. I simply followed arrangements and completed a process. 3 years later, I finally understood that process had destroyed a scientist. I said, "The wedding is cancelled." I repeated, my voice calm. "I don't agree to this marriage alliance." Hudson stood up and looked at my father. "Brother Wang, is this the Wang family's position?" My father quickly waved his hands. "Hudson, listen to me. This unfilial son. No need to explain." I cut him off. "This is my personal decision. It has nothing to do with the Wang family, nor the Liu family. I just think, two people's entire lives shouldn't be decided by a marriage alliance." As I said this, I kept looking at Willow. She still had that same expression, quiet and composed, like a white poplar tree standing in the wind. No protest, no questioning, no tears, but I saw her fingers tighten around the bouquet. Her knuckles turned white. Only later did I realize she was holding it in. She was holding back an overwhelming, all-consuming emotion that was almost drowning her. Not anger, not grievance, but relief. Chapter 3. My father rushed onto the stage and grabbed my arm. My mother screamed from below, telling me to shut up. The Liu family began whispering among themselves. Some were making phone calls, others checking stock prices on their phones. The scene quickly descended into chaos. As I was dragged off the stage, I took one last look at Willow. She happened to be looking at me too. We locked eyes across the entire banquet hall for about 3 seconds. Then she lowered her head, placed the bouquet on the chair beside her, and turned to leave. Her walk was slightly awkward. She wasn't used to those high heels, but her back was straight, straighter than it had been at any point in the past 3 years. The news of the broken engagement exploded within our social circle. That very afternoon, the Wang family's stock price dropped by 3%. My father smashed 3 teacups in his study, cursing me as the most unfilial son the Wang family has ever had. My mother sat in the living room crying, saying I was immature, saying the Liu family had such great conditions. Willow was such a good girl, what more could I possibly be dissatisfied with? I wasn't dissatisfied with anything. I just didn't want to ruin her life a second time. My father slammed the table. Do you have any idea what the Liu family's medical resources mean to the Wang family? I do, I replied. You do? You do, and yet you still. Dad, the Wang family's medical division doesn't lack money, it lacks technology, I said, looking at him. What the Liu family can give us is just channels and licenses. They don't even have the core technology themselves. A marriage alliance won't solve that. My father froze, because what I said was the truth. 3 years ago, the Wang family rushed into the alliance with the Liu family because Wang Medical got stuck in the licensing process and needed the Liu family's connections in the health authorities. But 3 years later, I realized, even after securing the license, the products had no real competitive edge and were ultimately crushed by competitors. And Willow, during those 3 years, hadn't done a single thing she was truly capable of doing. She studied gene editing. She could have changed something, no matter what. Do you know how much face the Wang family has lost? My father's tone softened slightly, but he was still unwilling to let it go. Hudson just called. He kept implying that we broke our word. I'll go explain it to the Liu family, I said. My father asked, how are you going to explain it? Say you don't like his daughter. Then what were you doing all this time? I didn't answer that question, because I couldn't tell him I had come back from 3 years in the future. I couldn't tell him that, in the version of life I had already lived, Willow died in the passenger seat of my car, and her last words were that she hoped not to be forced into a marriage alliance. Even if I told him, he wouldn't believe me. He would only think I had gone mad. The next day, I went to the Liu family. The Liu family's old residence was in the western part of the city, far more low-key than the Wang family's. 2 rows of ginkgo trees lined the courtyard. In autumn, the ground would be covered in golden leaves. When I went, it was May. The ginkgo leaves were still green, sunlight filtering through them, casting dappled shadows on the ground. The butler led me into the living room. Hudson sat in the main seat, his expression not very pleasant. George, about yesterday, shouldn't you give me an explanation? I bowed slightly. Uncle Liu, I'm sorry. Sorry is enough, he snorted. My daughter's lifelong matter, do you think this is a joke? It's not a joke, I said, lifting my head. Precisely because it isn't. I couldn't go through with that performance on stage. Hudson stared at me for a long time. He was a shrewd man, more ruthless in business than my father. He was evaluating me, judging whether I was telling the truth or making excuses. He asked, you don't like Willow? I've barely known her. I can't say whether I like her or not. Then why? I replied. Because I think she doesn't like me either. Hudson's expression changed. Not anger, but something far more complicated, like something he didn't want to face had just been exposed. He said, what makes you say that? I let out a quiet breath. Uncle Liu, Willow has a PhD from MIT in biochemistry, specializing in gene editing, I said, looking at him. Do you really think she would be happy marrying into the Wang family as a full-time housewife? Chapter 4. Silence. A long silence. Hudson picked up his teacup, took a sip, set it down, then picked it up again for another sip. She is a daughter of the Liu family, he said, his voice lowering. Some things aren't up to her, I know, I said. But if it's not up to her, it can be up to me. Hudson looked up. Marriage alliances involve 2 families, I continued. But calling it off, that's my decision alone. I'll take all the responsibility. I'll bear all the consequences. The Liu family won't have to suffer any losses. Everything Wang Corp promised in terms of resource allocation, I'll still honor it. What do you want? He asked. I don't want anything. Nothing. I only want one thing, I said. Let Willow go back to the lab. Hudson's hand trembled. A few drops of tea spilled from the cup, landing on the rosewood table and spreading into dark stains. He looked puzzled. She shouldn't be a full-time housewife, I said. She should be a scientist. The moment I finished speaking, I heard a faint sound behind me. like something falling to the ground. I turned around and saw Willow standing at the doorway of the living room. She was no longer wearing a wedding dress. Instead, she had changed into something simple, a white t-shirt, jeans, and a pair of canvas sneakers. Her hair was down, resting on her shoulders, and she wasn't wearing any makeup. This was her. This was the real her. A phone had fallen at her feet. She must have dropped it just now. She didn't pick it up. She just stood there, looking at me. Her eyes held many emotions: confusion, surprise, disbelief, and something subtle, like the tremor of being truly seen. "You," her voice was slightly hoarse. "What did you just say?" "I said you shouldn't be a full-time housewife." "Not that." The sentence after, "You should be a scientist." She froze. Her whole body seemed locked in place, standing motionless at the doorway. Sunlight streamed in from the window behind her, outlining her figure with a golden glow. Then I saw her eyes redden. She didn't cry. Her lips pressed tightly together, her chin trembling slightly, as she struggled to hold something back. After about 10 seconds, she took a deep breath, bent down to pick up her phone, and turned to leave. Without saying a single word, Hudson let out a sigh, leaning back into his chair and closing his eyes. "This girl, when she went to the US to study 3 years ago, I promised her that after finishing her PhD, she could come back and enter a research institute," he said, his voice heavy with fatigue. "But before her mother passed, she held my hand and told me to make sure Willow married into a good family. Her mother died of cancer, only 50. He opened his eyes and stared at the ceiling. "I was afraid I wouldn't have much time left either. I wanted to see her settled before I die." I didn't speak, because I had no right to judge a father's decision. I only knew that decision had almost destroyed Willow. "Uncle Lou, a good destination doesn't have to be marriage," I said. "It can also be a microscope and a laboratory." Hudson looked at me for a long time. In the end, he waved his hand. "You should go. Let me think about this." I stood up and took my leave. When I walked out of the Liu residence, I paused beneath the ginkgo trees. The leaves rustled softly in the wind. Sunlight scattered across the ground. I thought of the last thing Willow said in the ambulance. "If there's a next life, I hope I can continue my research and not be forced into a marriage alliance. In this life, I'll give her that." Chapter 5. The broken engagement stayed in the public spotlight for about a week before it gradually died down. The internet's memory is shorter than a goldfish's, and gossip about a wealthy family's marriage alliance, people only watched it for entertainment. After 3 days of decline, the Wang family's stock price began to rebound. My father's expression shifted from livid to gloomy, and eventually to reluctant acceptance. He stopped scolding me, but he also stopped talking to me. My mother, on the other hand, kept nagging in my ear every day, saying there was no response at all from the Liu family, saying how wonderful Willow was, asking if my brain had been crushed in a door. I ignored her, because I was busy with something. Wang Medical had recently started a new drug development project, collaborating with a biotech company in Beijing. I reviewed the project's technical materials and discovered a problem. Their target screening method was outdated. They were still using traditional high-throughput screening, low efficiency, high cost, and prone to missing truly effective targets. If CRISPR technology were used for genome-wide screening, efficiency could increase by at least tenfold. But Wang Medical had no technical foundation in this area. I looked into domestic gene editing teams and found that the top ones were all in universities and research institutes, with very little collaboration with companies. It wasn't that they were unwilling, it was that companies were usually unwilling to invest in long-cycle exploratory research like this. Companies wanted fast results. They wanted products that could be launched within 3 years. But fundamental research might not yield a single result even in 5 or 10 years. I took this proposal to the CEO of Wang Medical, a middle-aged man named Bradley. He was a long-time loyalist of the Wang family, having worked under my father for 20 years, steady, but conservative. "Mr. Wang, your idea is very good, but it's too forward-looking," Bradley said, adjusting his glasses. "CRISPR technology is still in the laboratory stage domestically. The risks of clinical application are too high, and we don't have prior experience in this field. If we rush into it and it fails, what if it succeeds?" I asked. "Success," he repeated. "If we can be the first to apply CRISPR technology to new drug development, the entire industry landscape will change," I said, sliding a document toward him. "These are the developments of several leading international companies. They're already doing it. If we don't act now, in 3 years, we won't even get a share of the leftovers." Bradley flipped through the materials and fell silent for a moment. "So what are you proposing?" "To build a gene editing laboratory," I said. "Recruit the best talent, offer the best conditions, and conduct the most cutting-edge research. What's the budget?" I replied. 50 million. Initial phase. Bradley inhaled sharply. "Mr. Wang, that number, I know it's large," I said, standing up. "But Bradley, Wang Medical's revenue last year was 4 billion. With a net profit of 600 million, 50 million is just 1/12 of that. Using 1 year's profit to bet on the next decade, can't you do that calculation? Bradley fell silent. He was a smart man. He could do the math. He just didn't dare. Should we discuss this with Chairman Wang? He asked, referring to my father. No need, I said. I'm in charge of the medical division now. I have the authority. If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility. Bradley looked at me, then nodded. All right, I'll have HR start looking for candidates. No need, I said. I'll choose the candidates myself. I spent 3 days reviewing every gene editing team in the country. At several universities, I went through every principal investigator who had published high-impact papers. Every promising young scholar. I reviewed their resumes, publications, and research directions one by one. Then I saw a name, Willow. During her PhD at MIT, she published a paper in Nature Biotechnology on the miniaturization of the CRISPR-Cas12f system. This system's advantage was its small size, making it easier to deliver into the human body, a promising direction for next-generation gene therapy. In the acknowledgments of the paper, her doctoral advisor had written, Willow is one of the most talented students I have ever mentored. Her understanding of gene editing far exceeds her peers. I believe that after returning to the county, she will become a leading figure in this field. Chapter 6. I read that passage 3 times. Then I picked up the phone and dialed a number. It was the Liu family's landline. The one who answered was their housekeeper. I'm looking for Willow. May I ask who is calling? George. There was silence on the other end for several seconds. The housekeeper probably hadn't expected that the men who had called off the wedding on the spot would be calling to look for Willow. Please hold. About 2 minutes later, a voice came through. Hello. It was her. Her voice was soft, carrying a hint of caution, but no hostility. Willow. It's George. I know. Your name showed up on caller ID. For a moment, I didn't know what to say. In business, I could negotiate with anyone, no matter how difficult the opponent. I could handle it with ease. But now, listening to her quiet breathing on the other end of the line, I found myself unable to organize my thoughts. She asked, what do you want? I'd like to invite you to work at Wang Medical. Silence. A long, very long silence. What did you just say? She asked. Wang Medical is going to establish a gene editing laboratory. I need someone to lead it. You're joking, right? I'm not. George, you called off our wedding 2 weeks ago, and now you're calling to ask me to work at your company. There was disbelief in her voice. Do you really think that's appropriate? Why wouldn't it be? I asked. Because, she paused before continuing. Because everyone would think you're pitying me, or trying to make up for something in a strange way. I let out a small laugh. I'm not pitying you, and I'm not making up for anything. I just need the most suitable person, and you are that person. What makes you say that? You don't even understand my research field, I replied. The miniaturization of the CRISPR-Cas12f system, its targeted delivery efficiency is 3 times higher than traditional Cas9, with a 40% reduction in off-target effects. Your doctoral work solved a long-standing bottleneck in this field. Your advisor wrote in a Nature Biotechnology paper that you're one of the most talented students they've ever mentored. The line went completely silent. So silent that all I could hear was my own heartbeat. You've read my papers. Her voice changed. No longer cautious, but softer. Something more vulnerable. I have. I said. More than one. You've published 4 first-author papers and 2 co-firsts, with a total impact factor above 80. During your 5 years at MIT, you were producing results almost every year. How do you know all this? Because I spent 3 days reviewing every young scholar working in gene editing, I said, and I found that you're the best. Another stretch of silence. Then I heard a very soft sound, something between a laugh and a sob. George, do you know something? She said. You're the first man who has ever come to me not because I'm the Liu family's daughter. That sentence was like a needle, thin, but piercing deep. My grip on the phone tightened. So, I asked, are you coming or not? I need to think about it. All right, but don't take too long. The lab won't wait. I hung up and leaned back in my chair, letting out a long breath. The sunlight outside was harsh, reflecting off the glass facade of the office building across the street, glaring and blinding. I stared at that light and thought back to 3 years ago, or rather, that timeline that no longer existed, when Willow sat in the passenger seat, her fingers tracing molecular structures on the car window. What had she been thinking then? Maybe she was thinking that if she hadn't married me, she would be in a lab right now, wearing Crocs and a lab coat, observing cells under a microscope, or working through complex formulas on a whiteboard, instead of sitting in a car heading to a resort, forcing herself to find topics to talk about with a man who didn't love her. I buried my face in my hands. This time, it won't happen again, I told myself. Chapter 7. Willow didn't make me wait long. The very next day, she called me back. I'll come, she said, but I have conditions. Go ahead. First, the research direction of the lab is up to me. You can't interfere. Agreed. Second, I choose my own team. You don't get to place any connections or insiders. Agreed. Third, she paused. I don't want a higher salary than others, but I want equal treatment. I don't want any special privileges just because I'm the Liu family's daughter, or because of you. Agreed. You agreed way too quickly, she said. Aren't you going to ask what my research direction is? What if it doesn't align with Wang Medical's strategy? I trust your judgment. George. She sighed. Do you know what your biggest problem is? What? You trust people too easily. I almost laughed. I trust people too easily. In the business world, everyone said I was overly suspicious, too calculating, that I never gave my opponents any room in negotiations. And yet she said I trusted people too easily. Maybe it was because, in front of her, I didn't want to be that George, the one who navigated corporate warfare. I just wanted to be the person who could send her back to the lab. There's one more thing, I said. What? You said before you're not used to high heels. When you come to work, just wear Crocs. There was a brief silence on the other end. Then she laughed. Not the polite, social kind of smile, but a genuine one, rising straight from the heart. The sound was soft, but I heard it. Okay, she said. A month later, the lab was ready. It was located on the 3rd floor of Wang Medical's RD Center, an entire floor, 1,200 square meters. From renovation to equipment procurement, I oversaw everything personally, not letting anyone interfere. Laminar flow hoods, biosafety cabinets, fluorescence microscopes, flow cytometers, real-time PCR machines, every piece of equipment a proper lab needed. I bought the best available. Just one next-generation sequencer cost $8 million. Bradley's face turned green when he saw the invoice. He licked his lips and said, Mr. Wang, this budget, I've said it before. If anything goes wrong, I'll take responsibility. Bradley said nothing more. On the day Willow joined, she wore Crocs. She was also wearing a white lab coat, with an MIT emblem pinned to her chest. Her hair was tied into a high ponytail. She stood at the entrance of the lab, staring at the brand new equipment and the bright, spotless workbenches for a long time. What's wrong? Not satisfied? I asked. No. Her voice was slightly hoarse. George, can I ask you a question? Go ahead. Why are you doing all this? I've told you, I need the most suitable person. Not that. She shook her head. I mean, why did you call off the wedding? You could have married me that day. It would have been good for the Wang family and the Liu family. Why take such a big risk? Offend both sides. Just to. I finished her sentence. Just to let you go back to the lab. She nodded. I fell silent for a moment. I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't say that in another timeline. She died in the passenger seat of my car, and her last words were that she regretted marrying me. So I chose a different answer, because I don't think you should be trapped in a kitchen and a living room. I said, you should be trapped in a laboratory. She froze for a second. Then she laughed. That's a strange way to put it, she said. Who would want to be trapped in a lab? You would, I said, because that's where you belong. Chapter 8. Her smile froze. Then her eyes reddened. This time, she couldn't hold it back. Tears slipped from the corners of her eyes, trailing down her cheeks and dripping onto her white lab coat, forming small dark circles. She wiped them with the back of her hand, but more tears came. Impossible to stop. Sorry, she said softly, her voice trembling. I'm not usually like this, I know. I just haven't stood in a lab for too long. The last time I wore a lab coat was 3 years ago. I know. She sniffed and said, what do you know? You don't know anything. After saying that, she turned and walked into the lab. I stood at the doorway, watching her figure disappear behind the laminar flow hood. She crouched down, opened the door of an incubator, and touched the shelves inside, as if confirming something. Then she stood up, walked to the window, and pushed it open. The wind blew in, lifting her ponytail. She leaned against the windowsill with her back to me, her shoulders trembling slightly. I knew she was crying, but I also knew this was a good kind of crying, the kind that comes when someone finds where they truly belong again. I stood at the doorway for a long time, until her shoulders stopped shaking, until she turned around, her eyes still red, but with a faint smile on her face. George, thank you, she said. No need to thank me, I replied. Just do your job well. Don't waste my $50 million worth of equipment. She let out a small laugh. Capitalist, she said. Then she put on her gloves and began her first real experiment in 3 years. The lab ran more smoothly than I had expected. Within 2 months, Willow built a complete CRISPR screening platform and began genome-wide target screening. Her first target was non-small cell lung cancer, the most important pipeline in Wang Medical. The existing targeted drugs had severe resistance issues, and new targets were urgently needed. Her efficiency was astonishing. Using traditional high-throughput screening, it would take about 6 months to screen an entire genome. With CRISPR, she completed the first round in 2 months and identified 17 candidate targets. When Bradley received the report, his hands were shaking. Mr. Wang, is this data real? Of course it is, I replied. Do you think she'd fake it? That's not what I mean, he said. I mean, the efficiency is incredible. If these targets are validated, Wong Medical will be at least 3 to 5 years ahead of competitors. I smiled. That's why I said 50 million isn't expensive. Bradley gave a bitter smile. Mr. Wong, I'm convinced. But things weren't that simple. Willow's arrival caused some subtle reactions within Wong Medical. First, among the senior staff in the RD center, most of them came from traditional pharmaceutical backgrounds and weren't particularly receptive to cutting-edge technologies like gene editing. On top of that, Willow's identity made things even more complicated. The Liu family's daughter, the woman who almost married into the Wong family, who got her engagement called off and was then hired into the company. That kind of gossip spread 100 times faster than experimental data. I started hearing whispers. Didn't she get in through connections? Of course, Liu family's daughter, and Mr. Wong's ex-fiancée, a 50 million lab just for her alone. Tisk, the world of the rich is beyond us. When those words reached my ears, I was in a meeting. I put down my pen and glanced around the conference room. Who said those things just now? I asked. No one spoke. I'll ask one more time. Who's been spreading those rumors about Willow in the RD center? A man in his early 30s raised his hand. His name was Noah. He was the deputy director of the RD center. Had been with Wong Medical for 6 years, one of the senior staff. Chapter 9. Mr. Wong. I said it. He replied directly, without any hesitation. But what I said is also the truth. Willow's resume is indeed impressive, but she has no industry experience. Taking charge of a 50 million project right away, it's only natural for people in the company to question it, isn't it? What exactly are they questioning? I asked. They're questioning whether she got in through connections. She got in through ability, I said. I've read her resume. I've read her papers. In the field of gene editing, there are no more than 3 people in this country who are stronger than her. But, Noah, do you know how many steps are involved in a full CRISPR screening workflow? He froze for a moment. I continued. Do you know the quality control standards for each step, from gRNA library design, to viral packaging, to cell infection, to next-generation sequencing data analysis? Noah said nothing. You don't, I said. But Willow does. Because during her 5 years at MIT, she did this every single day. And you, after 6 years at Wong Medical, have you ever conducted even one CRISPR experiment? He shook his head. Then keep your mouth shut and do your job. The conference room fell completely silent. I swept my gaze across everyone and said slowly, from now on, if I hear any more gossip about Willow, hand in your resignation yourself. I don't keep people who gossip behind others' backs. After the meeting, Bradley followed me into my office. Mr. Wong, what you said just now, it was satisfying, but it might make the RD team even more resistant toward her. I know. Then why? I sat down and said, because I don't care what they think. I care about results. Once Willow's targets are validated, everyone will shut up. Until then, if anyone dares to interfere with her or her work, I don't care who they are, they're out. Bradley looked at me, hesitating. Bradley, just say what you want to say, I said. Mr. Wong, I'll ask something I probably shouldn't. He said carefully. Your relationship with Willow, is it more than just employer and employee? I looked at him. What do you think? I think, Bradley chose his words cautiously. You care about her too much. A normal boss wouldn't offend the entire RD center for one employee. She's not an ordinary employee. I know. But what I mean is, Bradley, I cut him off. Do you know what the biggest problem of Wong Medical is? What? It's not a lack of money. It's not outdated technology. It's the lack of talent. For the past 20 years, we've been making generics and Me Too drugs. We've never dared to pursue true innovation because we never had truly top-tier scientists. Now that we finally have one, I'm going to protect her, so she can focus on her research. That's not because she's my ex-fiancée. It's because she is Wong Medical's future. Bradley was silent for a long time. Mr. Wong, what you said makes sense, he said as he stood up. But I still think, the way you care about her isn't just because she's a scientist. He didn't wait for my response before leaving. I sat in my office, staring out the window. Was Bradley right? I didn't know. I only knew that, in another timeline, when she died beside me, it felt as if my heart had been crushed in someone's grip. That kind of pain wasn't the kind you feel for an employee. Chapter 10. Willow worked late almost every night. Sometimes when I stayed until 11 or midnight and passed by the RD center, I could still see the lights on the 3rd floor. One time, I couldn't help but go up. The lab door was open. She was sitting in front of a microscope, completely focused on what she was observing, not even noticing me enter. I stood at the doorway for a while and saw a cup of coffee on her desk, already cold, and beside it, half a sandwich left unfinished. You're not eating, I said. She jumped in surprise, almost springing out of her chair. George, what are you doing here? Working late. Just passing by. Oh, she rubbed her eyes. I'm checking the staining of these cells. The transfection efficiency isn't very good for this batch. I'm trying to figure out why. Do you know what time it is? She glanced at the clock on the wall. 11:30 already. That fast. You haven't had dinner. I have. She pointed at the half sandwich. That, right there. That's afternoon tea. For me, it counts as dinner. I looked at her tired but shining eyes and suddenly felt a pang in my chest. In another timeline, she spent an hour every day putting on makeup, then sat at the dining table waiting for me to eat breakfast for 10 minutes. All her energy and passion were spent maintaining the image of a wealthy housewife. And now, she sat in front of a microscope, her eyes bright like stars. This was her. Let's go. I'll take you to eat something, I said. No need. I still have an experiment. Willow, I interrupted. Your cells won't run away just because you eat a meal, but your stomach will break if you don't. She hesitated, then took off her gloves. Fine, but something quick. We went to a 24-hour convenience store near the company. She stood in front of the Odin counter for a long time before finally choosing fish balls, konjac noodles, and radish. Did you eat this when you were at MIT? I asked. Something like it. She took a bite of a fish ball. They have convenience stores there too, but the Odin isn't as good as this. People in our lab would often go out late at night to grab food together, eating while discussing data. As she spoke, her voice gradually softened. After I came back to China, I never went to a lab again. And later, I stopped thinking about it. Why stop thinking about it? Because thinking about it would hurt more. She finished the fish ball and took a sip of the soup. If you know the one thing you want most in life will never happen, then it's better not to think about it at all. I was silent for a moment before asking, what about now? Now. She looked at the cup of Odin in her hand and smiled faintly. Now I think, these fish balls are actually pretty good. When she smiled, there were faint lines at the corners of her eyes. Not the kind that come with aging, but traces left by someone who had spent long hours working under a microscope, overusing the muscles around her eyes. I had never noticed before, because before, the Willow I saw was always perfectly made up, always composed. But now, she wore no makeup, her hair slightly messy, her lab coat still stained with culture medium from yesterday. And yet, her smile was more real than it had ever been. George, she suddenly called. Yeah. I've been wanting to ask you, that day at the wedding, why did you suddenly call it off? I told you. She cut me off. You said it was because I shouldn't be a full-time housewife. But how did you know that? We didn't even know each other back then. You didn't even know my research field, you only looked up my papers afterward. So when you called it off, you didn't even know what I did, right? I froze. She was right. At the time I called off the wedding, I didn't know her research field. I only looked it up later. In that moment, the only thing driving me was her death, and her final words, in another timeline. But I couldn't say that. I guessed. I said, guessed. I nodded. I guessed you wouldn't like that kind of life. She stared at me for a while. You're really strange, she said. Everyone tells me that marrying into the Wang family is a blessing, something people would beg for. But you say I wouldn't like it, do you? I asked. She didn't answer. She crushed the Odin cup in her hand and threw it into the trash. Let's go back. My cells are still waiting for me. She turned and walked away, her pace quick, as if she were avoiding something. Watching her retreating figure, I suddenly realized something. She hadn't denied it. Chapter 11. In the 4th month after the lab became operational, something went wrong. Among the 11 candidate targets Willow had identified, one showed extremely strong anti-cancer effects in preliminary validation. If this target could be fully verified, it would become an entirely new lung cancer therapeutic target, with no global competitors. Somehow, the news leaked. One morning, when I walked into my office, I found a letter on my desk. Not an email, a physical letter. There was no sender's name on the envelope, only the words, to George Wang, personal. I opened it. The message inside was brief. Mr. Wang, keep your people in check. Don't overreach. Some things are not for you to touch. I put the letter down and called the security department. Find out who placed this on my desk. Then I called Willow. Don't go to the lab today. Why? Someone might be watching you. Watching me. Why? Your target. There was a pause on the other end. You mean, someone doesn't want me to continue this research? Possibly. George, I can't just stop because of this. Her voice was calm, but firm. If this target is validated, it could change a lot of lives. I'm not going to give up because of a threatening letter. I'm not telling you to give up. I'm telling you to be careful. I am careful, but I'm also busy. I don't have time to play psychological games with people hiding in the shadows. She hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time before dialing another number. Sam, I need you to look into something. Sam was the Wang family security consultant, a former soldier, highly capable and sharp-minded. Mr. Wang, go ahead. Check if anyone has been asking about Wang Medical's RD pipeline recently, especially Willow's project. Got it. How soon do you need it? As soon as possible. 3 days later, Sam handed me a stack of documents. Found something. A biotech company called Medivara. Their RD direction overlaps heavily with Wang Medical's. They're also working on lung cancer targeted therapies. One of their core projects recently failed in phase 2 clinical trials, so they urgently need new targets to replenish their pipeline. So they've set their sights on Willow. Not just that. Sam flipped to a page of call records. They contacted a technician in your RD center through an intermediary. His name is Marco. He works in Willow's lab as support staff. Medivara offered him $2 million to buy Willow's target data. My grip tightened on the documents. Where is Marco now? I asked. Still at work. He doesn't know we've already found out. Bring him to me. When Marco was brought into the meeting room, his face was pale as paper. He looked about 25 or 26, had only graduated 2 years ago. Wearing black-framed glasses, he seemed like an honest person. Mr. Wang, sit. He sat down, his hands trembling. How long have you been working at Wang Medical? I asked. 2 years. Your salary? 8,000 after tax. 8,000. I repeated with a nod. Medivara offering you 2 million, that's quite tempting. Marco's face turned even whiter. Mr. Wang. I didn't. I cut him off. I didn't say you've done anything yet. I tossed the documents onto the table. But you've been in contact with them. That's a fact. Marco opened his mouth but couldn't say anything. What did they ask you to do? I asked. And not much yet. They just told me to observe where Dr. Liu stores her data, whether there are backups, what the lab's security system is like. Did you tell them anything? No, absolutely not. Marco panicked. Mr. Wang, I was confused for a moment, but I really didn't tell them anything. I haven't agreed to anything. If you didn't agree, why are you still in contact with them? Chapter 12. Marco lowered his head and said nothing. I looked at him. My thoughts complicated. 2 million, for someone who had only been working for 2 years, was an astronomical sum. He might never save that much money in his entire life. His salary was only 8,000, and half of it would go to rent in the city. I had no right to judge his choice, but I also couldn't tolerate any threat to Willow. Marco, I'll give you 2 options, I said. First, you resign voluntarily, and I won't pursue this. Second, I hand this over to legal, and you can prepare for a lawsuit. Marco looked up, his eyes red. Mr. Wang, can I stay? I really know I was wrong. No, I said. Not because you're disloyal, but because I can't trust it. Today someone offers 2 million for data. Tomorrow it might be 5 million. You might resist once, but not necessarily twice. This isn't your fault, it's about the price. But I can't allow someone who might be swayed by a price tag to remain in her lab. Marco started crying. He cried quietly, tears sliding down his face without a sound. Mr. Wang, I'm sorry. He stood up and bowed. Dr. Liu is a good person. She treated me well, taught me a lot. I'm really sorry to her. You can tell her that yourself. Marco froze for a moment, then nodded. After he left, I sat in the meeting room for a long time without moving. I thought about one question. If Marco had actually leaked the data to Medivara, what would happen to Willow? Would she break down? Would she feel that all her efforts had been for nothing? Would she regret coming to Wang Medical? I didn't know, but I knew one thing. I wouldn't let that happen. I picked up the phone and called the security department. From today onward, the floor where Willow's lab is located will have 24-hour surveillance. All personnel entering or exiting must use both access cards and fingerprint verification. All data must have dual encrypted backups. Without Willow's authorization, no one, including me, can access the original data. Mr. Wang, that level of clearance, the highest level, I said. Higher than mine. Understood. After hanging up, I went to the RD center. The lights on the 3rd floor were still on. Willow sat in front of the microscope, her back to the door, completely unaware of my presence. Her ponytail had slipped to one side. The sleeves of her lab coat were rolled above her elbows, revealing slender forearms. Her fingers were pale, joints defined, the kind of hands that had worn gloves for years. I stood at the doorway for a while, not going in. Then I turned and left. When I reached the elevator, I heard the sound of a door opening behind me. George? I turned around and saw her standing at the lab entrance, one hand holding the doorframe. How long have you been here? She asked. Just arrived. Do you need something? No, you're lying, she said. Every time something's on your mind, your walking pace slows down. You stood at the door for at least 3 minutes just now, but you didn't come in. That means you had something to say, but didn't know how. I froze. The way she observed people was completely different from everyone else. She didn't look at your expression, your tone, or your body language. She looked at the speed of your steps, because in a lab, a person's state could be seen from their rhythm of movement. When anxious, they walk fast. When discouraged, they slow down. When hesitant, they stop and start. That was how a scientist observed the world. Chapter 13. I asked, you know about Marco? I do. Her expression didn't change. He came to apologize to me just now. Are you angry? I am, she said. But more than that, I'm disappointed. Disappointed about what? That a young man with a good future almost ruined it for 2 million. She leaned against the doorframe. He's technically strong and learns quickly. If he worked steadily, in 3 to 5 years his value would far exceed 2 million. But he can't see that far. You've forgiven him. She nodded. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is whether they realize where they went wrong. You're not worried he'll do it again? He won't, she said. He cried hard. When someone truly realizes their mistake, the way they cry is different. After saying that, she glanced at me. You too. Your walking pace gave you away. What are you worried about? I was silent for a moment. I'm worried about you, I said. What about me? That this might make you lose confidence in doing research. She smiled. George, you're very sharp in business, but you really don't understand scientists. What do you mean? Scientists deal with failure every single day, she said. Failed experiments, failed data, rejected papers, rejected grants, being questioned, being scooped. We struggle through all of it constantly. A threatening letter, a technician trying to steal data, those don't even amount to 1% of a failed experiment for me. She looked at me, her eyes bright. Do you know what my worst experience at MIT was? What? I worked on an experiment for 2 years, only to find out in the end that the primers were designed wrong. 2 years of data, completely useless. I cried in the lab for an entire hour that day. But the next morning, I still got up at 6, redesigned the primers, and started over from scratch. She spoke calmly, as if telling someone else's story. So, George, you don't need to worry about me, she said. I'm much stronger than you think. After that, she turned back into the lab and closed the door. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door, and suddenly felt a little ridiculous. I had always thought I was protecting her, but in reality, she didn't need my protection at all. What she needed was simply a place where she could do her research, and I gave her that. That was enough. Chapter 14. In the 5th month, Willow's target validation entered a critical stage. She narrowed it down to 3 of the most promising candidates and began functional validation. This phase required a massive amount of cell and animal experiments. The workload was enormous. She recruited 2 assistants. One was a girl named Clara, a master's graduate from the Chinese Academy of Sciences with a background in cell biology. The other was a boy named Gideon, a PhD from Fudan specializing in bioinformatics. The 3 of them practically lived in the lab, sometimes working for 36 hours straight. Sometimes when I came by late at night, I would see the 3 of them gathered around a microscope, their heads close together, like 3 children observing some fascinating insect. You don't sleep? I asked. We did, Clara replied without even looking up. Dr. Liu has us on shifts, 4 hours each. Then it's your turn to sleep now. I'm not tired. This cell phenotype is too beautiful. I want to look at it a bit longer. I looked toward Willow. She was standing in front of a whiteboard, holding a marker, drawing a very complex signaling pathway diagram. Her lips were slightly dry, and there were deep dark circles under her eyes, but her energy was high. Willow. What? She replied without turning around. When was the last time you slept? Yesterday. What time yesterday? 4 in the afternoon. It was already 10 at night the next day. She hadn't slept for 30 hours. I walked over and took the marker from her hand. She frowned. What are you doing? Go to sleep. I haven't finished drawing. The whiteboard won't run away. The pathway diagram won't run away. But you might collapse. I won't collapse. Willow. I looked into her eyes. Your hands are shaking. She lowered her head and looked at her hands. They were indeed trembling. A subtle tremor from prolonged lack of sleep. She was silent for a moment, then sighed. Fine, but I'll only sleep 4 hours. 6, 5. Deal. She took off her lab coat and hung it over the back of a chair, then walked to a folding bed in the corner of the lab and lay down. She had prepared it herself, for nights when it got too late to go home. I covered her with a blanket. George, what is it? You were right. Her voice was already drowsy. The whiteboard won't run away. But if I don't wake up, remember to wake me. I will. She closed her eyes and fell asleep within 10 seconds. I stood beside the folding bed, looking down at her sleeping face. Her eyelashes were long, casting a soft shadow beneath her eyes. Her lips were slightly parted, her breathing light and even. One hand rested outside the blanket, her fingers slightly curled, as if still holding something. A pipette. She was probably still doing experiments in her dreams. I gently tucked her hand back under the blanket and turned to leave. When I reached the door, I heard her murmur something in her sleep. Her voice was soft, indistinct, but I heard it clearly. Primers, annealing temperature, lower it by 2 degrees. I smiled, and then my nose stung a little. Chapter 15. In the 7th month, Willow's target validation was completed. The results were even better than she had expected. The target, codenamed TGT-17, demonstrated extremely strong anti-tumor effects in both in vitro and in vivo experiments. After knocking down its expression using Cerna, the proliferation of non-small cell lung cancer cells was suppressed by 85%, and the tumor inhibition rate in the nude mouse xenograft model reached 78%. These numbers were top tier on a global scale. After receiving the full experimental report, Bradley sat in silence in the conference room for a full 5 minutes. President Wang, he finally said, his voice slightly hoarse, if this target is developed into a drug, the projected annual sales. Don't think about sales yet, I interrupted. Think about how to protect this achievement first. You mean patents? Not just patents. Willow, too. Bradley glanced at me and said, I understand what you mean, but President Wang, Dr. Liu is currently our most valuable asset. The company will spare no effort to ensure her safety. It's not just about safety, I said. It's about making her feel at ease. Whatever she wants, give it to her. Money, personnel, equipment, time, however much she needs, she gets. Bradley let out a bitter smile. President Wang, your concern for her, is it really just a professional relationship? I didn't answer, because I didn't know the answer myself anymore. That evening, Willow invited me to dinner. Not a formal business banquet, but a simple setup of takeout dishes in a small meeting room next to her lab. Clara and Gideon were there too. All three of them had an unmistakable look of relief and excitement on their faces. President Wang, come, sit, Clara said as she pulled out a chair for me. Today Dr. Liu is treating, so don't hold back. I looked at the spread on the table: pickled fish stew, spicy boiled beef, mapo tofu, dry fried green beans, all of it spicy. You like spicy food? I asked Willow. When I was in Boston, spicy dishes were what I missed the most. I thought scientists usually eat pretty light, I said. That's a stereotype. She picked up a slice of spicy boiled beef. Everyone in our lab can handle spice. When the pressure gets intense, spicy food is the most direct way to decompress. I thought of another timeline, where she ate those refined, delicately plated Huaiyang dishes at the Wang residence. Every dish was mild, no chili at all, because a wealthy family's wife was expected to eat for health and elegance. She had probably never truly eaten her fill. Come, President Wang, a toast to you. Gideon raised his cup of cola. If it weren't for you, Dr. Liu might still be a full-time housewife right now. That would have been the biggest loss to the scientific community. Willow shot him a glare. Gideon, that's enough. I'm just telling the truth, Gideon said with a grin. President Wang, you might not know this, but Dr. Liu is actually quite well known in our field. A lot of people have been asking where she went. Some say she got married and quit her career. Others say she went abroad. If they find out she's doing research at Wang Medical and producing data like this, the whole industry will go wild. Which is exactly why this information can't be leaked for now, I said. The patent application has already been submitted. Until it's approved, all data must remain strictly confidential. Understood. Gideon nodded. After dinner, Clara and Gideon tactfully left first. Only Willow and I remained in the meeting room. She leaned back in her chair, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold, gazing at the night view outside the window. George, yeah, have you ever thought about what things would be like if you hadn't backed out at the wedding that day? I had thought about it. Far too much. In the version I had already lived through, we got married. She became a full-time housewife for 3 years, waking up at 6 every morning to put on makeup, staying up late every night just to hand me a cup of honey water. She was never happy. In the end, she died in the passenger seat of my car, and before she died, she said she regretted marrying me, but I couldn't say any of that. Chapter 16. I haven't. I lied. She said, I have. What have you thought about? I asked. I've thought about what I'd be doing right now if I had actually married you. What would you be doing? Probably learning how to cook new dishes. She smiled faintly. My mom used to tell me that marrying into a wealthy family, the most important thing isn't your education or your abilities, it's your cooking skills. Because if you want to win a man's heart, you have to win his stomach first. Do you believe that? No, she said, but I would still learn because I'm a very serious person. No matter what I do it seriously. Even if I were a full-time housewife, I would do it with full dedication. Her voice was calm, but I could hear the quiet sorrow beneath it. A person who takes everything seriously, forced to pour all that dedication into something she doesn't love, that is probably one of the cruelest things in the world. But now I don't have to anymore. She stood up and stretched. Now I just need to focus seriously on my experiments. Thank you, George. You gave me what I wanted most. What? The right to choose. She looked at me, her eyes carrying both a smile and something I couldn't quite understand. You know, she said, most people in this world don't have the right to choose. They're pushed along by their background, their families, society, ending up wherever the current takes them. But you gave me that right. I waved it off. It wasn't me. You earned it yourself. Without you, I couldn't have, she said, because I wouldn't have had the opportunity. She picked up the empty cup on the table, walked to the door, and paused. George, yeah. Have you ever thought about getting to know each other again? What do you mean? I mean, she turned around, leaning against the doorframe. Our previous relationship was two people who almost entered an arranged marriage. That kind of relationship is strange and awkward. But what if we throw that away and start over? Start over as what? Start over as two people getting to know each other, she said. Not as potential marriage partners, not as boss and employee, just as two individuals. After saying that, there was a faint flush on her face. Whether it was from the spicy food or something else, I couldn't tell. How do you want to start over? Let's start with names. She extended her hand. Hi, I'm Willow. I work in gene editing. And you? I looked at her hand. It was slender, with defined knuckles, her nails cut short. I took her hand. Hi, I'm George. I'm in business. She smiled, a bright, genuine smile, like a child who had just made a new friend. Then please take care of me, George. Likewise, Willow. We stood there, shaking hands on opposite sides of the meeting room doorway, like two people who had just exchanged business cards. But I knew that from this moment on, something had changed. Chapter 17. After the patent was submitted, I thought everything would move forward smoothly. But I forgot one thing. The business world never goes easy on you just because you have good technology. On the contrary, good technology attracts even more people who want a piece of it. Medivara hadn't given up. After failing with Marco, they switched strategies. Instead of trying to steal data again, they directly filed a patent opposition against Willow's target. Their argument was, the TGT-17 target had already been mentioned in one of their earlier patents, and Willow's work did not constitute innovation. It was a far-fetched claim, because Medivara's so-called early patent only vaguely mentioned certain potential targets related to lung cancer in the background section. There was no specific sequence information or functional validation data at all. But in patent litigation, far-fetched doesn't mean invalid. As long as they could muddy the waters and stall Wong Medical's progress, Medivara would gain time to catch up. When Bradley told me about this, I was in my office reviewing Wong Group's reports. Medivara moved faster than we expected. He said, they've already submitted an opposition request to the patent review board. If it goes through, our patent could be delayed by at least a year. A year. At minimum. If it escalates into administrative litigation, it could take 2 to 3 years. 2 to 3 years. In the biopharmaceutical industry, that meant the entire window of opportunity for a field. If Wong Medical couldn't push this target into the clinical stage within 2 years, other companies would catch up. And by then, a track worth tens of billions would be carved up completely. I asked, who's behind Medivara? Bradley hesitated. We found out, but you might not want to hear it. Say it. Medivara's largest shareholder is Liu Group. My fingers froze on the desk. Liu Group. Hudson Liu's company. Willow's father. I frowned. You're saying Hudson is fighting a patent war against Wong Medical? Not necessarily Hudson himself, Bradley said. Medivara is just a company Liu Group has invested in. They hold 15%. Not a controlling stake, but Liu Group does have a seat on Medivara's board. Who holds that seat? Hudson Liu's nephew, Stephen Liu. Stephen. I knew him. The son of Hudson's older brother, 35 years old, in charge of investment operations within Liu Group. Rumor had it he was highly ambitious, always trying to prove he was better than Willow, especially since Hudson had no son, and the issue of succession within the family had always been sensitive. Why would he target Willow's project? I asked. 2 possibilities. Bradley raised 2 fingers. First, he genuinely sees the commercial value of this target and wants a share. Second, he wants to suppress Willow's position within the family. If she succeeds with this target, her standing in the Liu family will rise significantly. And Stephen, I finished his sentence. He doesn't want that to happen. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. This was more complicated than I had imagined. It wasn't just business competition, it involved internal power struggles within the Liu family. And Willow was caught in the middle. Bradley, I'll handle this, I said. President Wong, are you sure? Your relationship with the Liu family. I said I'll handle it. Bradley looked at me, nodded, and left. I picked up the phone and called Willow. Are you free right now? I'm running a gel. What's up? There's been a situation with your target. There was a pause on the other end before she said, is it Medivara? How did you know? Gideon looked into it. He downloaded their patent opposition filing. I read through it. Her voice was calm. The patent they cited, I read it 3 years ago. There's only one sentence about TGT-17, saying this target may play a role in lung cancer. No supporting data at all. This opposition has no real basis. I know it doesn't, I said. But legal procedures take time. What do we do then? Focus on your experiments for now. Leave the legal side to me. George. Yeah. Thank you. No need. Just do your work well. She let out a small laugh and hung up. But I wasn't as relaxed as she was, because I knew Stephen wasn't the kind of person who would give up easily. If the patent opposition failed, he would definitely resort to other methods. I needed to start planning ahead. Chapter 18. I arranged to meet Stephen Liu. The location was a cafe near his company. He arrived 20 minutes late, dressed in a tailored suit, his hair perfectly styled, carrying an air of deliberately crafted composure as he walked over. President Wang, long time no see, he said with a smile as he sat down. The last time we met was at your wedding. Oh wait, the one that never actually happened. He was testing me, using the broken engagement to provoke a reaction. I didn't take the bait. President Liu, I want to talk about Medivara. Medivara. He feigned confusion. What about Medivara? You know what I mean. President Wang, I don't quite understand. He said, Medivara is Medivara. Liu Group is just a minor shareholder. I only sit in on the board. I'm not involved in operations. The patent dispute between Medivara and Wang Medical has nothing to do with me. I smiled. President Liu, we're both in business. There's no need for polite nonsense. I looked at him. What do you want? Stephen stared at me for a moment, then dropped the smile. George, you're straightforward. My time is limited. Fine, then I won't beat around the bush. He leaned back in his chair. I want a share of the TGT-17 target. How? Wang Medical and Medivara co-develop it. We split the profits 50-50. Impossible. Then 60-40. You take 60, I take 40. I shook my head. I'm saying co-development is impossible. This target was discovered by Willow. She won't agree to collaborate with Medivara. Whether she agrees doesn't matter. Stephen's expression turned cold. What matters is this: without Medivara's cooperation, your patent will be delayed at least 2 years. In 2 years, the entire field will already be taken by others. Choose. I choose a third option. A third option. I shrugged. Bypass Medivara's patent opposition and push straight into the clinical stage. Stephen laughed. George, are you insane? Without patent protection, how do you plan to go clinical? The moment you enter clinical trials, others will copy you immediately. Then it becomes a race. I stood up and placed the money for the coffee on the table. President Liu, let me say this one last time. TGT-17 is Willow's work. No one gets to take it, not even her family. Stephen's expression changed. George, what do you mean? What are you implying? I'm not implying anything. I'm stating it clearly. I looked straight at him. Willow is your cousin. Even if you don't help her. Fine, but sabotaging her from behind. Do you really think that's appropriate? Stephen was silent for a few seconds, then let out a cold laugh. George, do you know why you backed out of the wedding? Why? Because you don't understand the Liu family. He stood up, meeting my gaze. In the Liu family, no one sees Willow as a scientist. She's just a daughter meant for an arranged marriage. Her mother was the same, and so is she. You think giving her a lab changes anything? It doesn't. Because the Liu family doesn't need scientists, they need pieces on a chessboard. With that, he turned and left. I stood there, watching his figure disappear through the cafe entrance. Outside, the sunlight was harsh, shimmering over the asphalt and distorting the air with rising heat. I clenched my fists. Every word Stephen said cut like a blade, not because they were cruel, but because they were true. In the Liu family, Willow had never been a scientist. She was just a daughter meant for an arranged marriage, a daughter whose value depended on who she married. Her PhD, her papers, her research achievements. In the eyes of the Liu family, they were nothing more than part of her dowry, just labels. Labels to raise her worth. Suddenly, I felt sick. Sick of the Liu family, and sick of myself, because in another timeline, I had been the same kind of person. Someone who only looked at labels. What I saw was a MIT PhD marrying into the Wang family, and I thought it was a perfect match, but I had never once thought about what that MIT PhD meant to her. It wasn't a label, it was her life. Chapter 19. By the time I returned to the company, it was already dark. The lights on the 3rd floor of the RD center were still on. Willow was still in the lab. I went upstairs, pushed the door open, and saw her sitting in front of a microscope, holding a pipette, passaging cells. You're still here? Almost done, she said without looking up. I'll leave after I finish this batch. I sat down beside her. Willow, I want to ask you something. Go ahead. Why did you agree to the arranged marriage back then? Her hand paused. The pipette hovered in midair for 2 seconds before she continued. Because of my dad. Did he force you? No. She put down the pipette and turned to look at me. He didn't force me. He just said one thing. What did he say? He said, Willow, my health isn't good. I might not have many years left before I go. I want to see you settled in a good place. Her voice was calm, but I saw her eyes redden. I said, your mother also passed away because of cancer. Yeah. So you couldn't refuse him. That's right. She lowered her head. When a father who might not have long to live makes his only request of you, you can't refuse, even if it's something you don't want to do. She took off her glasses and rubbed her eyes. Actually, I knew my dad's condition wasn't that bad. He was using it to make me give in. But, what if he really didn't have much time left? I didn't want him to be disappointed before he passed. So you sacrificed yourself. I wouldn't call it a sacrifice. She gave a faint, Bitter smile. I just felt that being a scientist and being a daughter, sometimes you can only choose one. Who says that? Reality. She put her glasses back on and continued passaging the cells. George, you know what? I used to hate you. I froze for a moment. Hate me? Yeah, the day you called off the wedding. I really hated you. She placed the culture dish into the incubator and closed the door. Not because you refused to marry me, but because you humiliated me in front of so many people. At the time, I thought, even if you didn't want to marry me, you could have told me privately. Why did you have to put me in that position in public? I'm sorry. You don't need to apologize. Later, I figured it out. She turned around, leaning against the incubator, looking at me. You called it off in public to take all the blame onto yourself. If it had been done privately, everyone would have said it was the Liu family's daughter who got rejected, that it was my fault. But by doing it publicly, everyone would say the Wang family's son was unreliable, that it was your fault. She looked at me, her eyes bright. You were protecting me. I stayed silent. She was right. That had been my intention. But I couldn't tell her that the reason I thought of it at all was because, in another timeline, I had seen her bear far more than she ever should have. George, I've been thinking about something, she said. What? Why are you so good to me? I'm not being good to you. You are. She cut me off. You gave me a lab, gave me the best equipment, shielded me from all the gossip, stood up for me the moment I was threatened. You don't even let me wear high heels. Tell me, if that's not being good to someone, what is? She walked up to me, standing very close. I could smell the faint scent of disinfectant on her. George, she looked straight into my eyes. Do you like me? Chapter 20. The question came too suddenly. I suddenly felt my heartbeat accelerate, my breathing becoming a little difficult. Not because I was nervous, but because I didn't know the answer. Did I like her? In another timeline, I had been married to her for 3 years, yet I had never truly understood her. I didn't know she liked spicy food. I didn't know she could draw molecular structures. I didn't know her fingers would trace patterns on a car window. A version of me like that. Did I even have the right to say I liked her? I don't know, I said. She froze for a moment. You don't know? I don't know if I have the right to like you, I said, because everything I know about you only started recently. Before that, I knew nothing about you. She looked at me in silence for a long time. Then she smiled. George, you know what? You're the strangest man I've ever met. Why? Because most men in this situation would say, I like you. Even if they didn't truly mean it, they would still say it. But you said, I don't know. That means you're serious. She reached out and patted my shoulder. It's okay. You can take your time to figure it out. I have plenty of time. She turned back to the microscope and continued observing her cells. Oh, right. She added, you still haven't told me what's going on with Medivara. I sighed. Not great. Stephen is pulling strings behind the scenes. The patent will be delayed for at least a year. Stephen. Her expression changed. My cousin. Yeah. She fell silent for a moment. I knew it, she said, her voice lowering. He's always been competing with me since we were kids. If I ranked first, he had to be first. If I went abroad, he had to go abroad. If I did research, he wanted to do research too, but he couldn't. So he went into investment instead. And now that I've developed a target, he wants to take it. What are you going to do? I asked. Nothing. She looked up. I'll focus on my experiments. You handle the legal side. That's our division of responsibilities. Right. Right. Good. She smiled faintly. George, I trust you. After saying that, she lowered her head and continued looking through the microscope. I stood behind her, watching her focused profile, and suddenly felt something swelling in my chest. It wasn't pain. It was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time, like something inside me was finally being filled. In another timeline, I had never felt this, because I had never truly seen her. But now, I did. She wasn't a wealthy family's wife. She wasn't a tool for an arranged marriage. She wasn't anyone's pawn. She was Willow, a scientist, a serious, stubborn, brilliant scientist. She deserved the best laboratory, the most cutting-edge research, the most freedom in her life. Not a husband who didn't love her, a pair of ill-fitting high heels, or a cup of honey water waited on until late at night. Willow. Yeah. I've figured out the answer. What answer? The question you asked me earlier. Her hand paused on the focus knob of the microscope. You like me? She asked. She didn't turn around, but I could see the tips of her ears turning red. I'm not sure if it's love, I said, but I do know one thing. What? I don't want to see you get hurt ever again. She was silent for a long time. The light from the microscope reflected in her eyes, forming 2 tiny points of glow. George. Yeah. That answer moves me more than I like you ever could. She still didn't turn around, but I saw the corners of her lips lift into a smile. Chapter 21. The patent opposition hearing was scheduled for 2 months later. During those 2 months, Willow practically lived in the lab. She not only had to carry out follow-up validation experiments for TGT-17, but also prepare the technical documentation to respond to the patent opposition. Medivara had hired top-tier patent lawyers, coming in aggressively. Bradley suggested that we hire external counsel as well, but I refused. I'll handle it myself, I said. President Wang, you're not a lawyer. I don't need to be. I need someone who understands the science. Willow understands it better than I do. All I need to do is translate what she says into legal language. Bradley looked at me and said nothing more. During those 2 months, Willow and I were together almost every day. During the day, she worked in the lab while I reviewed documents in the office next door. At night, we would eat oten from the convenience store together. Then she would go back to the lab to keep working, and I would return to the office to continue reading case files. Sometimes, when her experiments overwhelmed her, she would come to my office and sit quietly. She wouldn't say anything, just sit there. Sometimes she would fall asleep on the desk for 10 minutes, then get up and say, "Okay, I'm going back." Once, she fell asleep on my desk, and I draped a coat over her. In her sleep, she murmured, "George, your data is wrong." I almost laughed out loud. Even in her dreams, she was criticizing my data. The night before the hearing, she came to see me. "George, I'm a little nervous." "You, nervous?" I was surprised. "You weren't nervous after 2 years of failed experiments, but now you are." "That's different." She sat across from me, holding a cup with both hands. "When experiments fail, that's my own problem. But this target, it's not just mine. It affects Wang Medical's entire pipeline, and the expectations of so many people, and your cousin's ambitions," I added. She fell silent for a moment. "I've actually been thinking about something," she said. "What? If TGT-17 really becomes a drug, how many people could it save?" I didn't answer. The 5-year survival rate for non-small cell lung cancer is only 19% right now, she said. "If this target truly works, that number could increase to over 35%. Nearly 2 million people die from lung cancer globally every year." If she didn't finish, because she started crying. Not the kind of breakdown where someone sobs uncontrollably, just quiet tears rolling down her cheeks, and she didn't even wipe them away. "Willow, I'm fine," she sniffed. "I just feel like what I've been doing finally matters." I smiled. "What you did before mattered too." "No," she shook her head. "At MIT, I was doing basic research, publishing papers, securing grants, mentoring students, but those studies are too far from clinical application. It might take 10 or 20 years before they translate. But TGT-17 is different. It might actually save people." She looked up, her eyes red, but bright. "George, thank you. Without you, I would never have had this opportunity. I've told you, no need to thank me. Just do your work well." She glared at me. "Can't you say something else? You say that every time. What do you want me to say?" I asked. "For example," she hesitated, then said, "You could say something like, 'I'm proud of you.'" I was silent for a moment. "Willow, I'm proud of you." She froze. Then her face turned red. You're way too direct," she said. I shrugged. "You asked me to say it. Just because I asked doesn't mean you had to say it. Aren't you usually good at refusing people? In front of you, I can't refuse." She looked at me, her eyes shimmering with moisture, and a hint of laughter. "George, you're really unfair." "What do you mean?" "I mean," she lowered her head, her voice very soft. "Every time you say things like that, my heart starts racing." The office was quiet, so quiet that I could hear my own heartbeat. It was racing too. "Willow, yeah. After the hearing, there's something I want to tell you." She looked up at me. "What is it?" "I'll tell you after it's over." She stared at me for a moment, then smiled. "All right, I'll wait." She stood up, walked to the door, then turned back to look at me. "George, yeah. No matter how the hearing turns out, I don't regret coming here." Then she left. I sat in the office, staring at the closed door, my heart still racing. I knew what I wanted to tell her, but I would wait until after the hearing, because before that, I didn't want to distract her. Chapter 22. The patent review hearing was held in a gray government building. Willow and I arrived half an hour early. She was dressed in a black suit, her hair tied back in a ponytail, no makeup on her face. "Are you nervous?" I asked. "Not nervous," she said, "but I'm a bit cold. The air conditioning in this building is too strong." I took off my coat and handed it to her. She hesitated for a moment, then accepted it and draped it over herself. "Thank you. No need." Wearing my coat, she sat beside me, flipping through the technical documents in her hands. Her fingers were trembling slightly, not from nerves, but from the cold. Medivara's team arrived 10 minutes later. Stephen Liu walked at the front, followed by 2 lawyers and a technical expert. When he saw Willow and me, he gave a slight nod as a greeting. Willow didn't look at him. She kept her head down, continuing to review her materials. The hearing was chaired by 2 patent examiners from the review committee, a man and a woman, both in their 40s, with serious expressions. Medivara's lawyer spoke first. Their core argument was simple: the TGT-17 target had already been mentioned in one of Medivara's earlier patents, and therefore Willow's work lacked novelty and should not be granted patent protection. To support this claim, they brought in a technical expert, a biology professor from a well-known university. The professor spoke for 20 minutes, citing numerous papers and patents, attempting to prove that TGT-17 was a predictable target for a person skilled in the art. After he finished, the examiner looked at me, representative of Wang Medical. Do you have a response? I stood up and walked to the front. I don't have much to say. I'd like to invite our technical expert to provide an explanation. I looked at Willow. She stood up, took off my coat and hung it on the back of the chair, then walked to the front. The way she stood there was completely different from how she looked in the lab. In the lab, she was quiet, focused, immersed in her own world. But on the stage, her presence changed entirely. She became sharp. Honorable examiners, she began. I have read Medivara's patent, number ZL78-9. In the background section, they mentioned certain targets potentially related to lung cancer, including a vague reference to a gene identifier. But please note, she turned on the projector. A table appeared on the screen. The sequence corresponding to that gene identifier differs from the sequence of the TGT-17 target they are now claiming by 37%. 37%. In genetics, a sequence difference of more than 15% means it is not the same target. A 37% difference means these are two completely different genes. Medivara's lawyer stood up. Objection. Ms. Liu is conflating concepts. Sequence difference does not equal functional difference. I am not conflating anything. Willow interrupted him, her voice calm but firm. I am stating facts. The gene mentioned in Medivara's patent encodes a transcription factor. TGT-17 encodes a membrane receptor. Their molecular functions, cellular localization, signaling pathways, there is no similarity whatsoever. This is like saying that because your patent mentioned cars, all patents for bicycles should be rejected. Chapter 23. The room fell silent for a few seconds. The examiners exchanged glances and nodded. Please continue, the female examiner said. Willow flipped to the next slide. This is the functional validation data for TGT-17, she said. In vitro experiments, in vivo experiments, mechanism of action studies, all original, unpublished data. These results demonstrate the function of TGT-17 in non-small cell lung cancer, as well as its feasibility as a therapeutic target. None of this appears in Medivara's patent, not a single word. She glanced at Stephen Liu. Therefore, Medivara's patent opposition is invalid. Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. Stephen's expression changed. His lawyer stood up, attempting to argue back, but Willow had already turned off the projector and returned to her seat. When she sat down, her hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from the adrenaline crash. Under the table, I reached out and held her hand. Her hand was cold, but she gripped mine firmly in return. The examiner announced the end of the hearing. The result would be announced within 30 working days. When we walked out of the building, the sunlight was harsh. Willow squinted, raising her hand to shield her eyes. George, yeah. How did I do just now? Very well. Really? Really? You were even better than I imagined. She smiled. Well, of course, I'm an MIT PhD. When she said that, there was a long-lost pride in her tone. The pride of a scientist in her own expertise. Not the pride of being a daughter of the Liu family. Not the pride of being a wealthy wife, but the pride of being a scientist. Let's go, I said. I'll take you out for a real meal. Not convenience store Odin. Deal, she said. I want spicy food. Fine, the spiciest kind. We walked side by side under the sunlight, our shadows stretching long. Her shadow overlapped with mine, like two people holding hands. I didn't hold her hand, but I thought, maybe one day, I would. 4 weeks later, the result came out. The Patent Review Committee rejected Medivara's opposition and upheld the validity of Wang Medical's patent. When Bradley walked into my office with the notice, his expression looked like he had just won the lottery. President Wang, we did it. I took the notice and read through it. Then I picked up the phone and called Willow. The result is out. We won. There was silence on the other end for 3 seconds. Then I heard a long exhale. George, yeah. I feel like crying. Then cry. But I'm still in the lab. Clara and Gideon are here. Then go to the meeting room and cry. No one's there. She let out a small laugh, her voice trembling with tears. You're really bad at comforting people. I know, but I tried. All right, I'm hanging up. I'm going to cry for a bit. She hung up. I put down the phone and looked out the window. The sunlight was bright. I thought of what she had said before she died in another timeline. If there's a next life, I hope I can keep being a scientist without being pushed into an arranged marriage. In this life, she didn't need a next one, because she already had it. Chapter 24. That night, I took Willow out to dinner. Not convenience store Odin, and not spicy takeout either. It was a quiet restaurant on an old street in the eastern part of the city, with only 6 tables, serving fusion cuisine. Willow wore a white shirt, her hair down, no makeup. "This place is pretty hard to find," she said, looking around. "How did you know about it?" "A friend recommended it." In truth, it was Bradley. He said this was where he took his wife on dates, good atmosphere, great food, and most importantly, quiet, suitable for important conversations. "You seem a little different today," she said, looking at me. "Is something going on?" "Didn't I say before, after the hearing, I had something I wanted to tell you?" "Oh, right." She put down her chopsticks. "What is it?" I took a deep breath. "Willow, there's something I want to tell you. It might sound unbelievable, but I hope you'll let me finish." "What is it?" "Do you believe in a next life?" She froze for a moment. "A next life? Or being reborn? Do you believe a person can live their life over again?" She looked at me, her expression turning serious. "George, what are you talking about?" "I'm saying," I looked straight at her, "I've already lived through one life. In that life, we got married." Silence. A long silence. She put down her chopsticks, folded her hands on the table, and looked at me. "Go on." "In that life, we entered an arranged marriage. You were a full-time housewife for 3 years. You woke up at 6 every morning to put on makeup, and stayed up late every night waiting for me. You weren't happy, but I didn't know, because I never cared about you." Her expression changed. Not shock, something deeper, more complicated. "And then," she asked, "then one day, we were driving to go on vacation. There was a car accident in a tunnel. You," my voice faltered, because the memory was too vivid. The long cut across her forehead, blood covering half her face, the warmth of her hand slipping from mine, the flat line stretching across the heart monitor. "What happened to me?" Her voice was very soft. "You didn't make it." Silence. The restaurant was quiet, with only the faint clinking of cutlery from another table. "Before you died, you said something to me," I continued. "You said, if there's a next life, I hope I can keep being a scientist, and not be forced into an arranged marriage." Willow's eyes turned red. She didn't cry, but her lips trembled. "So," her voice was slightly hoarse, "so that's why you called off the wedding. That's why you built a lab for me. That's why you've been so good to me." "Yes, because you owe me." "No." I shook my head. "Not because I owe you, because I realized your worth." "What worth?" "You're a scientist. You shouldn't be trapped in a kitchen or a living room. You belong in a lab, doing what you're good at, what you love, doing things that can change the world." She lowered her head, tears falling onto the table. "George, you know what?" She looked up again, her face wet with tears, but she was smiling. "I always felt there was a reason you treated me so well. I just never imagined it was this." "Do you believe me?" I asked. "I do," she said, "because otherwise, none of your actions make sense. How could someone as calculating as you in business suddenly treat a complete stranger so well for no reason?" Chapter 25. She wiped her tears with the back of her hand. And also what? "And also, in that story you just told, the sentence I said before I died, if there's a next life, I hope I can keep being a scientist and not be forced into an arranged marriage. That's exactly something I would say." She looked at me, her eyes bright, "because that's what I truly think. From the moment I agreed to the arranged marriage, that thought has been in my mind. I just never said it out loud." "Willow, don't speak yet," she interrupted me. "It's my turn now." She took a deep breath. "George, in that version I never experienced, we got married. I wasn't happy, and neither were you. I was a scientist trapped in a mansion, and you were a businessman married to a woman you didn't love. We were draining each other, but in this version, you gave me a lab, and I gave you a target potentially worth hundreds of billions. We elevate each other." She paused. "And also," her face turned red, "and also, I've started to like you." Those words were like a stone dropped into still water. I could hear my own heartbeat, not because of the lab, not because of the target, not because of any exchange of benefits, she said, "but because you're the kind of person who goes to a convenience store late at night to buy me Odin. You're the kind of person who helps me work out signaling pathways on my whiteboard. You're the kind of person who puts a blanket over me when I fall asleep. You're someone who truly sees me." Tears rolled down her face again. At MIT, everyone looked at my papers, my data, my impact factor. After I returned to the Liu family, everyone looked at my marriage value, my arranged match, my dowry. No one ever looked at me, but you did. You noticed I don't like wearing high heels. You noticed the way I draw molecular structures. You noticed me muttering in my sleep about lowering the annealing temperature by 2 degrees. You saw that Willow is a scientist. She stood up and walked over to me. "George, I don't know if this is love, but I do know that if there's someone in this world worth loving, it's you." She extended her hand, just like that day in the meeting room. "Hello, my name is Willow. I work in gene editing. I like you. What about you?" I looked at her hand. These hands had performed countless experiments, held pipettes countless times, drawn endless signaling pathways. In another timeline, these same hands had worn a wedding ring, holding a cup of honey water, waiting in the living room for a man who never came home. But now, these hands were free. I took her hand. This time, not as arranged marriage partners, not as boss and employee, but as two people. Hello, my name is George. I'm in business. I like you too. She smiled, a bright smile, tears still on her face. You said it too. I nodded. Yeah. So you liked me before? Maybe. I wasn't sure, but now I am. When did you realize? When you fell asleep in front of the microscope. You said in your dream, lower the primer annealing temperature by 2 degrees. That's when I knew. Her face turned red. You were eavesdropping on my sleep talk. You said it yourself. That doesn't count. George, you're really unfair. You said that before. Then I'll say it again. She smiled, pulled her hand out of mine, and then, she hugged me. Her head rested on my shoulder, her hair brushing against my neck, slightly ticklish. She was thin. I could feel her shoulder blades against my chest, but I could also feel her heartbeat. Fast, just like mine. George, her voice was muffled against my shoulder. Yeah. I wish we had met earlier. It's not too late now, I said. She tightened her arms around me. It's not too late. Chapter 26. The news that we were together caused an uproar between the two families. My mother was the first to call. Her voice was trembling with excitement. George, you and Willow are together. I knew it. I knew something was off when you called off the wedding. Did you already like her back then? Why didn't you say anything? You made me worry for so long. Mom, calm down. I can't calm down. I'm going to call Willow. I'm going to invite her to dinner. I'm going to. Mom. All right. I'll calm down, but you must bring her home for dinner this weekend. No excuses. My father's reaction was more complicated. He called me into his study, closed the door, and stayed silent for a long time. George, you and Willow, are you serious? Yes. Back when you called off the wedding, was it because of this? No, I didn't even know her then. Then why did you call it off? I shrugged, because I figured she wouldn't like that kind of life. My father looked at me for a long time. You've always been hard to understand, he said, but everything you do ends up being right. Last time, when you said you wanted to build a gene editing lab, I disagreed, but you pushed through anyway. And now, that target is making headlines in the financial news. Wong Medical's stock price has gone up 15%. He paused, then added. So this time, I won't stop you either. But remember one thing. What? Willow is a good woman. Don't let her down. I won't. On Hudson's side, the reaction was unexpected. He didn't call to scold me, nor did he call to congratulate us. He simply sent Willow a message on WeChat. Just a few words. Do your best, kid. When Willow showed me that message, her eyes turned red. This is the first time he's called me kid, she said. Before, he always called me Willow. What's the difference between Willow and kid? Willow is a name a daughter is called by. Kid is how a father calls his daughter. In Hudson's eyes, Willow was no longer just a daughter meant for an arranged marriage. She was someone with her own career, her own achievements, someone he could finally be proud of. Chapter 27. We didn't have a grand wedding. Willow said she didn't want one. Weddings are exhausting, she said. Makeup, high heels, standing on stage while hundreds of people stare at you. And besides, she added, that last wedding was already enough for me, even if it didn't actually happen. Then what do you want? I asked. Something simple, she said. We'll register the marriage, then have a meal with both families. That's enough. That's it. That's it. Don't you feel like you're missing out? Not at all. She looked at me. George, I don't need a wedding to prove anything. I just need you. I looked at her and suddenly thought of the wedding in another timeline. The white gown, the flawless makeup, the hall full of guests. She stood at the other end of the red carpet, holding a bouquet, her fingertips cold. In that wedding, she wasn't a bride. She was something being traded. But this time, there was no wedding, no red carpet, no hall full of guests, just the two of us, walking into the civil affairs office on a bright afternoon, taking a single photograph. In the photo, she wore a simple white t-shirt, her hair tied in a ponytail, no makeup, but she was smiling, a genuine, unguarded smile that came from the heart. After we finished, she stood at the entrance, holding up the marriage certificate toward the sunlight. George, look, the photo turned out pretty well. Yeah, you're not going to say anything else? Like what? Like, wife, you look beautiful. I was silent for a moment, then said, wife, you look beautiful. She burst out laughing. You sounded so reluctant. I wasn't. I meant it. Then why did you almost laugh? Because, I thought for a moment, because the word wife sounds strange coming from me. Why strange? Because I've never said it before. Then you'll have to get used to it. She put the certificate into her bag and hooked her arm through mine. Because from now on, I'm your wife. Her grip on my arm was firm. I could feel her warmth, so different from the cold I remembered in another timeline. When she died. Willow, yeah. You once said that if there were a next life, You wanted to keep being a scientist and not be forced into an arranged marriage. I did. What about this life? She stopped and looked at me. In this life, I'm a scientist, and your wife, she said. I want both. She stood on her toes and kissed my cheek. Come on, let's go home. I still need to review tomorrow's experimental plan. She took my hand and pulled me forward. The sunlight fell on her, her ponytail swaying gently in the breeze. As I watched her, a word came to mind: closure. In another timeline, the story ended with her death and regret. In this one, it began with her rebirth and fulfillment. Not because I saved her, but because I saw her, a scientist, a serious, stubborn, brilliant scientist, my wife. Chapter 28. 1 year later, the TGT-17 target entered the preclinical development stage. Willow had worked in the lab for 72 consecutive hours, completing the final batch of toxicology data. When she walked out, her eyes were red, her hair was a mess, and there was a coffee stain on her lab coat, but she was holding a data report in her hand, smiling like a child. George, look, this batch of data passed every benchmark. I took the report and read through it. Good. Prepare for IND submission. She nodded vigorously. If everything goes smoothly, we can enter phase 1 clinical trials next year. And if phase 1 goes well, then we can save lives. Her eyes lit up like stars. George, we can really save lives. As she spoke, tears began to fall, but she was smiling. George, you know what? When I was at MIT, I never imagined my research would come this far. I thought I'd spend my whole life in the lab, publishing papers, mentoring students, applying for grants, doing cool but ultimately useless basic research. But now it's different. She wiped her tears. What I'm doing now can actually save people. This feeling. She couldn't finish her sentence, because she was crying too hard. I pulled her into my arms. She leaned against my shoulder, crying like a child. Thank you, George. Thank you for giving me all of this. It's not something I gave you, I said. You earned it yourself, but you gave me the opportunity. Opportunities are for those who are prepared. You prepared for 10 years, I just showed up at the right time. She looked up at me through tear-filled eyes. George, you're really bad at saying romantic things. I know, but everything you say still makes me want to cry. Then cry. I'm not crying anymore. She wiped her face. I still have cells to check. I haven't finished today's passaging. She broke free from my arms and ran back into the lab. At the door, she stopped, turned back, and looked at me. George, yeah. In the next life, I still want to be a scientist. And the arranged marriage? She smiled. If it's with you, I might consider it. With that, she slipped back into the lab and closed the door. I stood in the hallway, staring at the closed door. The corridor was quiet, filled only with the hum of the air conditioning, but I could hear her voice, behind the door. She was talking to Clara. Clara, how's the transfection efficiency for this batch of cells? Dr. Liu, not bad. Positive rate is 65%. Optimize it further. We should be able to reach over 70%. Got it. I smiled. Then I turned and left. When I reached the elevator, I paused and glanced at my phone. The wallpaper was the photo from our marriage certificate. She was smiling brightly. So was I. This was our best version. Not a marriage of wealthy families. Not an exchange of interests. Just two people, seeing each other, lifting each other up. She didn't want my money. She didn't want my status. She didn't want anything from me. All she wanted was a lab. And what I could give her was more than just a lab. It was a home. A home without high heels or honey water. A home where she could wear Crocs, eat spicy street food, and mumble in her sleep about lowering the annealing temperature by 2 degrees. That home was our shared target.